Hi there. So Thursday evening is a bit of a strange time to record a YouTube video, but towards the end of this video you'll see why I recorded it this evening and not on Friday evening. So first of all, I want to shout out to Paul Richardson, who was the very experienced ride engineer from Tenneco, who helped me out on my very first damper tuning session for the Ford Focus RS project. So following the video I made on the Ford Focus RS switchable dampers, Paul was a little bit was wondering why I didn't mention him. So here it is. Many thanks, Paul, and thanks a lot for all that you've taught me over the course of that project. Yeah, Paul was in fact the damper tuning specialist who did the damper tuning on that project. So onto the video. So this video is about whether wider tires are always better, and in fact, as the title suggests already, that's not always the case. So first of all, a few words on how tires generate grip. So tires generate grip through adhesion, which is like a molecular forces between the tires, between the tire molecules and the molecules in the road. I believe van der Waals forces, but yeah, need to double check that. Anyway, so adhesion, that is typically there when the pavement is dry, and adhesion is lost when there's a film of water or oil between the tire and the road. So when it's raining, we don't just fly off the road. We still have quite good grip, and that's because there's interlocking between the macro structures in the road and the rubber, and also there's the micro roughness of the road. Plus, with the tire pushing through the film of water, there is still some adhesion going on. It's just not as strong as when it's dry. And rubber is a viscoelastic material, and which means that it has spring and damper characteristics. And when tires are too cold, then the rubber will not deform. So if it doesn't deform, there's less adhesion, and also there's also less interlocking between the rubber and the macro and micro structures on the road surface. And if the tire gets too hot, that can lead to tire pressures becoming quite high, and at that point the tire starts to act more like a pure spring. There's almost no tire damping left, and there's then a lot of tire hop, which leads to very bad fluctuations in the contact force between the tire and the road, which causes loss of grip. So in fact, what you want is a tire to be nice and evenly loaded at the correct pressure, at the correct working temperature, that the rubber is somewhat soft and is deforming, so that you have plenty of adhesion and you have plenty of interlocking between the rubber and the road. Normally, wider tires are better than narrow tires for lap times, because of the phenomenon known as tire saturation, which is where if you have load transfer, you gain some additional lateral tire force on the outside tire, or if you're braking on the tires in the front. So you gain some, but the tire that gets deload, that has reduced load, so the inside tire, you lose more lateral tire force from the inside tire than what you gain on the outside tires. So as a net result, you end up with less grip. And wider tires suffer less from this phenomenon. So wider tires don't saturate as fast as a narrow tire. And so if you suffer less from tire saturation, then for the same low transfer, you end up with more grip left. And wider tires also deal with heat buildup better, so they don't heat up as quickly, which means that you don't suffer from the overheating problems. So you have more grip for longer. But as suggested in the title of this video, wider tires are not always better, because exception number 1 is if you have a tire that's too wide for the rim. This is quite easy to understand. Besides being dangerous, if the tire is too narrow for the rim that's used, then the sidewalls will be very flexible. The car will feel very wobbly. The driver will not have much confidence in the car due to that wobbliness. Plus, the contact patch is also most likely not the right shape. Exception number 2 for why wider tires are not always better. So if the car is low powered, and especially if it's too low powered, so with wider tires you expect to gain some lap time in the corners. However, you must remember that you will have some losses on the straights, even with a very powerful car, because you have wider tire, which needs a wider rim. This means there's higher rotational inertia. This means it takes more power to accelerate and brake this rotational inertia. And therefore, if the car is relatively low powered, then what you lose on the straights might actually exceed what you gain in the corners. And so at that point, the tires and rims are too wide. And by low powered, I don't mean like a 50-60 horsepower car. It could also be a 200 to 300 horsepower car. Even with such a vehicle, it is possible to just go too wide, and so it might be better to go for a, say, only slightly wider than normal, but with a very good tire compound, rather than going really, really wide. So exception number 3 is if the vehicle cannot warm up the rubber to the correct temperature. So as mentioned, tires have an optimum working temperature with peak grip and traction, and if the tire is so wide that the vehicle is not able to bring the rubber up to that working temperature, then the tire is too wide. So the optimum temperature depends on the rubber compound and can be in quite a wide range. So I think road tires will typically be a bit colder, so closer to the 60 degree range, whereas racing tires, racing slicks, such as used in Formula 1, can be close to 100 degrees. So if the vehicle is not able to bring the tire up to that temperature, then at that point the tires are in fact too wide. And 4th is aquaplaning. So below you see 2 pictures from Nürburgring. So one from TCR, a TCR race, and the second one is a very famous race from 2007, where I believe Marcus Winkelhock actually led the race in a spiker. And a whole bunch of other cars just flew off into the gravel at turn 1 due to aquaplaning. So to cut through the water layer, so that there is some adhesion and also some interlocking between the tire rubber and the macro and micro structures in the road, the tire needs sufficient pressure on it, as well as grooves and sipes to clear the water. And as a side note, this is also why trucks almost never suffer from aquaplaning. Trucks are filled to a much higher pressure than car tires, and due to the truck's weight, so that very high filling pressure is also roughly the pressure, probably exactly, the pressure that is seen on the ground. And so with that much higher pressure, the water just gets squeezed out, and trucks will, because trucks are also limited to say 90 kilometers per hour, where they will, truck tires with a truck fully loaded will probably not aquaplane until say 140 kilometers per hour or so. So as the top speed is lower than that aquaplaning speed, trucks will never aquaplane. So when the tire is not able to cut through water anymore, then the tires are too wide. So when there's a lot of water on the road surface, it's actually helpful to have a narrow tire which is filled to a higher pressure than a very wide tire with a low filling pressure. So that actually brings us nicely to this weekend's Formula 1 race, and why I'm making this video on the Thursday night and not on the Friday. So I'm predicting that the teams and drivers will complain about tire warm-up, because if you look at the weather forecast for the Nürburgring for this weekend, it seems to, the prediction seems to be rain with quite low temperatures, and in fact the temperatures are so low on Saturday and Sunday that they might potentially break the record for the coldest race ever. So probably not, but it should be close. So the coldest race ever, coldest Formula 1 race ever, was 5 degrees air temperature at the 1978 Canadian Grand Prix, and I would expect that the race will be close to that. Okay, so it might be closer to 8, but still it's very cold. So what could the teams do in terms of setup to try and mitigate against the cold and the wet? So they will use wet tires if it rains, of course. More grooves and sipes helps the clear the water, and also the rubber blocks will move around a lot more, which generates heat, which is needed to for the tire to work properly, as explained. Probably run slightly higher tire temperatures. That will help a little bit in terms of reducing the size of the contact patch, increasing the contact pressure between the tire, between the rubber and the road. Higher downforce helps. If so, Nürburgring is relatively Nürburgring Grand Prix is relatively high downforce anyway, and if it's wet, then they'll try to probably run even higher downforce. It helps tire warm up because the downforce will help deform the tire as it rolls. And deforming the tire as it rolls helps with the warm up. Plus, the downforce helps cut through the water. The brake balance needs to be more towards the back than in a dry race, because with the lower reduced grip, there's less load transfer under braking. Softer springs and anti-roll bars are helpful to reduce the warp stiffness. Warp stiffness, or warp, is when you have, say, vertical input at just one wheel, so the two axles want to roll in different directions. That's called warp. And in general, you want the warp stiffness as low as possible for maximum traction. But that is then trade-off with your roll stiffness, which helps with responsiveness. But if it's really wet, then you want to load the tires more evenly, because that then means there's less chance of a lockup or spinning up a less loaded tire. And finally, this is something that teams probably will not do, but possibly they could. So that's, increase the ride height, because that reduces chances of aquaplaning on the plank below the car. So Formula 1 wet tires are already larger in diameter than the dry weather tires, which raises up the ride height of the car due to that larger diameter. So because of that, the tires kind of solve that problem for the engineers. They don't have to increase the ride height through the springs, and increasing the height will lead to also more load transfer from the higher center of gravity, which helps the tire warm up. However, and this is why I say it's probably unlikely for the F1 teams to really increase the ride height more than what the wet tires are already providing, because the higher center of gravity is bad for locking up or spinning up of the less loaded tire, because if you have a higher center of gravity, then you have more load transfer for the same acceleration, and it's normally that's a bad thing. So I believe we come to the end of the video. Hope that was interesting. Let's see what happens in the race. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I don't expect that to be the case, but let's see. Let's see if my prediction comes true or not. So I'm not expecting total chaos like 2007, because that was like a unexpected rain shower, whereas now the teams are probably expecting a wet race. But anyway, let's see what happens. Should be interesting. Hope it was interesting. Until next time.